The glass didn't just tip, it sailed. One moment, El Martin was balancing a tray with 2 crystal wine glasses, and the next, a flood of Chateau Margaux, 2004, arched through the air in a rich red wave before crashing squarely onto the chest of the man in the charcoal 3-piece suit, seated at table 9. The liquid soaked the front of his crisp white shirt and bled into his tailored vest like ink into paper. Silence hit the rooftop restaurant harder than the glass hitting the floor. Gasps fluttered from nearby tables. One woman shrieked. Somewhere behind her, a manager cursed under his breath, but Elle couldn't hear any of it over the roar in her own ears. Her body locked up, a statue carved from fear and disbelief. The man stood slowly. He didn't shout, didn't flinch. He looked down at his stained shirt, then up at her. His eyes were an unflinching steel gray, unreadable, calculating. His face didn't twitch. His mouth didn't even tighten. He just stared, long and hard, like he was taking her apart and putting her back together with a glance. Ella opened her mouth to apologize, but no sound came. A gust of wind moved through the rooftop, rustling napkins and her apron tie. A waiter nearby dropped a fork. The world, for a split second, seemed to tilt. Then the man spoke. "You," he said, voice low and crisp. "What's your name?" Her throat finally unlocked. "Elle Martin." He nodded once, glanced at the restaurant manager who had arrived panting beside him. "I don't want her fired." That surprised everyone, including Elle. The manager stuttered something incoherent. The man ignored him. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a sleek black card, and handed it to her. "Be at gate G3, he said. "Private terminal, 3 a.m., wear something dark." Ella stared at the card, then at him. "I what?" "You spilled red wine on a $12,000 jacket," he said. "You owe me something more than sorry." He turned, left a stack of bills on the table, and walked out without another word. Elle stood frozen, the card shaking in her hand. Gold letters gleamed up at her in the moonlight. Callan Rhodes, RHO Air, founder and CEO. By the time her shift ended, she had replayed the moment at least 40 times in her head. The way he hadn't looked angry, only curious. The way he'd chosen not to humiliate her in public, but also not let her forget what she'd done. It didn't feel like punishment. It felt like a test. And somehow she'd been invited into something far bigger than spilled wine. Now, hours later, standing alone at the edge of a sleek, quiet hangar, Ella clutched the black card in her fingers and stared up at a private jet glowing under blue halogen lights. The stairs were lowered. The door was open. No one else around. She swallowed hard. The wind bit at her cheeks, lifting strands of hair from beneath the wool coat she'd borrowed. One step forward, then another. Her boots tapped softly on the metal stairs. And then, before she could take a breath, she was inside. The door sealed shut behind her. The cabin was silent, luxurious, intimate, and at the far end of the aisle, sitting in a leather seat with a glass of bourbon in hand, was Callan Rhodes. He didn't rise. He didn't speak. He just looked at her and said, "Good. You came." Ella Martin had always lived quietly, like a ghost inhabiting borrowed spaces. She was the type of girl who moved through the world apologetically, eyes lowered, hands steady, her presence a whisper in crowded rooms. She had never made headlines, never posted selfies, never kissed anyone long enough to remember. At 22, she had mastered the art of disappearing without leaving. Raised in the foster system, she learned early that invisibility was safer than exposure, silence softer than rejection. Her virginity wasn't a virtue. It was just the one thing no one had ever claimed. There had been offers, of course. Curious boys with soft hands and sharper words, older men who mistook her quiet for submission. But none of them made her feel anything worth risking her body for. She didn't wait for love. She waited for recognition. Someone who saw her not as a vessel, but as a person. By day, Elle studied architecture at a community college with more mold than windows. At night, she served overpriced dishes to people who never remembered her face. Tips were her lifeline, shame, her shadow. She never complained. Survival wasn't supposed to be comfortable. It was supposed to be efficient. That night, when the wine left her tray and collided with the billionaire's chest, she thought her cycle had finally broken in the worst possible way. But now, sitting across from the man in the jet's leather interior, she wasn't sure if her story had ended or just begun. Callan Rhodes was not what she expected, not in person. He wasn't movie, star, handsome. He was sharper than that, all cheekbones and jawline, like his face had been carved in confidence and then polished with frost. There was nothing soft about him, not his voice, not his expression, not the way he looked at her like he was calculating the trajectory of her next breath. But it wasn't cruelty in his gaze. It was precision, like he didn't make room in his world for randomness, and she had just broken his algorithm. Callan had built an empire out of silence. Rhodes Holdings had started with 3 aircraft, a borrowed loan, and a lawsuit that nearly killed him. By 34, he owned the largest luxury air network in the Northern Hemisphere, had crushed every competitor, and had somehow remained untouched by scandal. He didn't date publicly, he didn't appear on panels, he didn't speak at galas, but he watched, and when he moved, people cleared the way. He was once engaged, briefly, to the daughter of a senator. The tabloids had tried to spin it into a power couple story, but insiders whispered that she had left him the day after a test flight crash in Iceland. The plane survived. The relationship didn't. What no one knew was that Callan had designed the flight himself. It was supposed to be his boldest innovation, something to bring humanity back into flying. It never launched, not because of the crash, because the one person who mattered walked away. Since then, he trusted no one outside his circle, and his circle barely fit 2 people. Elle didn't know any of that. But what she did know, as she looked at him now, was that he didn't invite people into his presence by accident. "You're wondering why you're here," he said, voice smooth but direct. She nodded, unsure if she should speak. "I could have yelled at you," he continued, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "I could have filed a complaint, sued the restaurant, cost you your job." "You didn't," she said, almost too quietly. "No," he agreed, "because you did something none of them ever do." She frowned. "I spilled wine on you." "No," he said, his eyes locked on hers. "You looked me in the eye, and you didn't flinch." That stunned her. "Most people look away," he said. "They treat me like a headline. Or a warning. But you..." He leaned forward, setting the glass down. "You were terrified, but you stayed." Ella wasn't sure what answer he wanted, so she gave the only one she had. "I've spent my whole life being invisible. When the glass fell, I figured this was the first time someone might actually see me, even if it was for the wrong reason." Callan didn't respond immediately. He just studied her for a long, heavy moment. Then finally, he said, "I'm going to ask you a question. You only get one chance to answer it." Her breath caught. "Why shouldn't I send you back to that rooftop and pretend tonight never happened?" She met his gaze, steady now. "Because I didn't come to impress you. I came to find out why I wasn't afraid." That made him still, completely, as if the words hit a chord only he knew existed. The plane continued its ascent. Elle didn't know where they were going, but for the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was falling. She felt like she was floating, and that somehow was far more dangerous. The engines hummed beneath them like a heartbeat too steady to trust. Elle sat upright, both hands folded neatly in her lap, trying not to look at the man across from her for longer than a second. She still didn't know where they were going. The flight manifest hadn't been shared. The flight attendant had vanished behind the cabin divider. and Callan, impossibly composed, continued sipping his drink with the casual elegance of someone born to be followed. He hadn't spoken again since her answer. He hadn't needed to. The tension between them wasn't hostile. It was analytical, like he was watching a new equation unfold and still deciding whether to solve it or walk away. The cabin was silent, except for the low whir of the altitude regulator and the occasional clink of ice in his glass. Ella tried to focus on the window. Clouds slid past like brush strokes, and the city below had long since vanished into blackness. "You lied," he said suddenly, voice quiet but absolute. She turned her head, startled. "About what?" "You said you weren't afraid," he replied, eyes unreadable. "But you are. I can see it." She didn't deny it. "Maybe I'm more afraid of what happens when I start wanting something I can't have." "Like what?" "Like a moment where I don't have to apologize for being exactly who I am." Callan's expression didn't change, but something in his posture softened. He set his glass aside and leaned forward, forearms on his knees, his gaze narrowing slightly. "When I was 25, I bought my first jet, not to impress anyone, not for travel convenience, but because I hated airports, I hated waiting rooms, I hated being looked at like an investment or a threat. Up here I could disappear without hiding." Ella blinked. "You feel the need to hide?" "Not hide," he corrected. "Control the distance, decide who gets close." She absorbed that. The words felt familiar. She had spent most of her life controlling distance, not to protect herself from others, but to protect others from her mess. He studied her again, eyes tracking every micro-expression. "What do you see when you look at me?" he asked. It wasn't flirtation. It was curiosity. She hesitated, then answered honestly. "I see someone who stopped believing people could want him without needing something in return." Callan stilled. "That's accurate. I didn't say it to be kind." "I know," he said, and for the first time there was something almost like a smile at the corner of his mouth. The plane jolted slightly, a pocket of turbulence. Ella gripped the armrest before she could stop herself. Callan didn't move for a second. Then, slowly, he reached across the space and rested his hand over hers. Not tightly, not possessively, just enough to ground her. His skin was warm, his touch steady. Her pulse thrummed under his fingers. "You're safe," he said simply. Her eyes met his, and for a moment, neither of them blinked. "It's not the plane I'm afraid of," she whispered. "It's what I'll feel when it lands." "And what's that?" "That this, whatever this is, will end." He didn't pull away. "Maybe the point isn't how long it lasts. Maybe the point is what it breaks open." She didn't understand what he meant until he stood and walked toward the back of the cabin. She thought he was leaving her there, but then he returned with a small leather-bound folder and dropped it gently in her lap. "Open it," he said. Inside were blueprints, floor plans, cabin concepts, design renderings in grayscale. "What is this?" she asked. "The future of my company," he said. "I'm rebuilding the interiors of every luxury fleet jet I own. I want them to feel less like status symbols and more like sanctuaries. Spaces where people remember how to breathe. My team doesn't get it. They make it look expensive, but not human." He looked down at her. "I think you might see what I'm trying to say." "You want me to help you?" she asked, stunned. "I want to know if you still want to disappear," he replied, "or if you're ready to leave fingerprints on something that matters." She looked up at him. This man who could have destroyed her career, her confidence, her night, and instead offered her a seat in the sky and a chance to be seen. "I don't have credentials," she said. "I don't have years of experience. I'm a waitress with a sketch pad and student loans." Then you'll be the only person in the room who still remembers what real people need." They sat in silence after that. Her hands still trembled, but not from fear, from possibility. She watched him as he returned to his seat, as he poured another drink without offering her one, as he gazed out the window like the clouds might answer something he wasn't ready to ask. And, when the turbulence passed and the cabin settled, Ella leaned her head back and closed her eyes, not to sleep, but to hold on to the quiet, because for the first time it didn't feel empty. It felt earned. The jet touched down just before dawn. Ellie didn't know where they were, some coastal runway surrounded by hills and mist, but Callan had already stepped off without waiting for her, disappearing into a black car with tinted windows. A driver escorted her to a small hotel nearby with no name on the door and a key card with no instructions. Her room overlooked the ocean. No one spoke to her. No one explained anything. She didn't sleep. She sat on the edge of the bed, fully dressed, the folder of blueprints still pressed against her chest like a shield. By mid-morning, a knock came. It wasn't Callan. It was a woman in a slate-gray blazer who introduced herself only as Wren. "Mr. Rhodes would like you to join him for coffee," she said, "if you're willing." Elle followed her in silence, led through a private corridor that opened into a lounge made of floor-to-ceiling glass and polished stone. Callan sat alone at a corner table, staring out at the sea, 2 cups of coffee untouched in front of him. He didn't rise when Ellie approached. He just gestured to the seat across from him. "Sleep?" he asked. She shook her head. "Didn't think so," he said. Then, after a pause, "Neither did I." They drank in silence for a while, not companionable, not tense, just 2 people nursing something unspoken. Finally, he said, "I want you to tell me something true." "What kind of true?" she asked. "The kind that costs you something." Ella exhaled, long and slow. "I've never had anyone wait for me," she said. "Not at a dinner table, not at a school gate, not even when I was little and late to foster orientation. No one waits. So I stopped expecting it." Callan nodded once, slowly. "I've never had anyone stay," he said. "They show up for what I can give them, for the idea of me, and when they realize I'm not what they imagined, they leave." "Is that what you think I want? What I came for?" "You came because I told you to. That's not the same as staying." She looked at him hard. "I came because you looked at me like you saw something worth remembering." Callan's hand flexed slightly on the table. He turned his gaze back to the sea. "My first jet crashed," he said quietly. "Not the one in Iceland, the one before, a prototype. The first thing I ever designed. I wasn't on it, but the woman I loved was. She died, not on impact. She was alive for 6 minutes. I know because the rescue team had her on audio. She was asking for me." Elle's breath caught. "I didn't answer," he continued. "I was on another call. I didn't know until it was too late." The air thickened between them. "Since then, I don't design for beauty," he said. "I design for redemption. I keep trying to build something good enough to forgive me." Elle didn't reach for his hand. She didn't offer comfort. Instead, she said, "Maybe you need to stop trying to be forgiven and start trying to be honest." He blinked at her. "You're not here to save me," he said. "And you're not here to be saved," she replied. "So maybe we're finally in the same place." Callan let out a slow breath. Then he pushed a small notebook across the table. "Draw something," he said. "Anything." "Why?" "Because I need to see if your hands shake when you create, or only when you survive." Ella stared at the blank page. Then, slowly, she picked up the pencil and began to draw. Not a blueprint, not a chair. She drew her own hands, open, empty, waiting. He watched in silence, and when she finished, he said, "Good. You remember how to be vulnerable." That afternoon, they returned to the hangar. Callan showed her the workshop. let her touch the fabrics, run her fingers along the curved metal of a redesigned console. He didn't speak much, just watched her process everything. Once, she asked him why there was no music in the space. He replied, "Because silence is the only thing that doesn't lie." That night, they didn't share a room. She returned to her hotel. He stayed at the hangar, but the thread between them, invisible and taut, remained. Ella lay awake, staring at the ceiling, heart racing not from fear, but from recognition. She had met someone who wasn't trying to fill her silence, but to meet her in it. Someone who didn't ask her to be less afraid, just to stay anyway. And she knew, in the slow, terrifying ache of realization, that she didn't want this to be a one-night exception. She wanted this to be the start of something she hadn't dared believe she could have, something not built in survival, but in choice, something with him. They began working together the following Monday. No announcement, no formal hiring process, just a brief nod from Callan and a shared understanding that Elle would begin contributing to the interior redesign. The team of engineers, designers, and consultants at RHOAIR didn't know what to make of her, this quiet girl in secondhand jeans, sketching alone in corners and speaking only when spoken to. But Callan did. He watched the way her fingers moved across paper, the way she tilted her head when observing spatial flow, the way she frowned when something didn't feel right. He let her lead discussions when it came to human experience, comfort, and emotional aesthetics. Slowly, almost reluctantly, the others began to listen. They met every morning in the hangar conference room. Callan would bring 2 coffees, always black, one with a hint of cinnamon, just the way she'd mentioned in passing. He never commented when she was late or when she wore the same coat 3 days in a row. He just waited, quietly, unshakably. There were disagreements, of course. One morning, she pushed back hard on a proposed lighting scheme that she said felt like a bank lobby designed by someone who hated feelings. The room went silent. Callan looked at her, expression unreadable, then turned to the design team and said, "She's right. Start over." Word began to spread. Not about romance. No one dared to speculate that, but about a girl who could say no to Callan Rhodes and still keep her seat at the table. Elle didn't let it go to her head. She didn't even let it reach her chest. She was too busy trying not to feel the way her heart caught every time Callan brushed past her chair or bent over her sketches and stood just a little too close. They never touched, not once, but their silence had evolved. It wasn't cold or neutral. It was charged, intimate, like 2 people in a room full of noise who only listened for each other's breath. One night, after a long session reviewing seat configurations, Elle fell asleep in the corner of the hangar. It wasn't planned. She'd curled up on a bench, with her coat pulled over her knees and a pen still tucked behind her ear. Callan found her like that an hour later. He didn't wake her. He just stood there, watching her chest rise and fall, with the steady rhythm of exhaustion. Then, without a word, he pulled his scarf from his neck and laid it gently over her shoulder. In the morning, she found it folded beside her sketch pad, with a single note written in his handwriting. "You make the air quieter." Later that week, she brought him a small lunch, homemade sandwiches, still warm, wrapped in foil. He looked at the package, then at her. "You didn't have to." "Neither did you," she replied, pointing to the scarf. He ate every bite without speaking, then said, "You're the first person who's ever fed me without expecting something in return." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Then you're welcome. No strings." But there were strings. Invisible ones. Threads pulling tighter with each passing day. When they spoke, it was never small talk. It was always real. She told him about her sketches from childhood, how she used to draw doorways that opened into nowhere because she wanted escape routes that didn't exist. He told her about his mother, who had died young, and his father, who taught him to win but never to feel. They didn't flirt, they confessed, and in doing so, they became something closer than lovers and heavier than friends. The team was preparing to present the first completed prototype to the board, a new cabin experience designed around vulnerability and space, a place where high altitude didn't mean high pressure. Elle had poured herself into the details, every stitch, every surface. She even handwrote a design manifesto titled Softness at 30K Feet and left it on Callan's desk. He didn't say anything about it, but she saw the edges of the pages curled as if he'd read it more than once. The night before the presentation, they stayed late making final adjustments. The hangar was dim, lit only by the floor lights and the glow of the prototype cabin. She was bent over a console panel, adjusting angle and texture when she felt him behind her. Close, not touching, just there. She didn't turn. "Is it weird," she asked, "that I don't feel small when I stand next to you?" "No," he said. "It means I haven't failed you yet." She straightened and turned slowly to face him. They were less than a foot apart. His eyes searched hers. "You terrify me," he said. "Why?" "Because I want to take you apart and still have you choose to stay." She didn't answer. She couldn't. Instead, she said, "Do you remember what I drew the first time you asked me to?" "Your hands," he said. "Open, empty." She nodded. "Now I want to draw them full, but I don't know with what." "Then maybe," he said quietly, "we figure that out together." He didn't kiss her. She didn't lean in. But the silence between them wasn't waiting for anything more. It was enough. And somehow, it was everything. When she left that night, walking alone to the staff quarters, with his words still echoing in her chest, she knew something irreversible had happened. Not an explosion, not a confession, just a shift, a gravity change, a choice neither of them had voiced but both had already made. The cabin prototype was ready, but so was something else, something more fragile, more real, and far harder to fly. The morning of the presentation began with clouds and silence. Ella stood beside Callan at the front of the hangar, watching board members and investors filter in, all sharp suits and sharper opinions. The prototype cabin gleamed under the lights, every detail a reflection of months of work and invisible emotion. Callan introduced the concept with precision, emphasizing functionality, safety, and innovation. But when it came time to explain the emotional core, he turned to Elle. She didn't panic. She stepped forward, unrolling the design manifesto with steady hands, and speaking not like an employee, but like someone who had lived inside every inch of the space. She spoke of softness, of silence, of the need for quiet in a world too loud. When she finished, the room held its breath, and then came the applause. Later, while the team celebrated in the adjoining room, Callan disappeared. Ella found him outside, standing in the shadow of the jet, arms crossed, gaze distant. "You didn't stay for the congratulations," she said. "I don't like noise," he replied. "You do realize they loved it." "I didn't build it for them." "Then who?" "You know who." His eyes met hers, and for a second, everything that had been simmering between them felt seconds from boiling over. But before either could speak, Wren appeared at the doorway with a phone in hand and a stiff expression. "You need to see this," she said to Callan. He took the phone and stared at the screen. Ella saw his jaw tighten, the muscle there flexing once, sharply. He handed the phone back and turned to her. "Don't go online," he said. "Why?" "Just don't." But it was too late. Her own phone buzzed in her pocket, and when she looked, her heart dropped. The photo was grainy but unmistakable, her and Callan, late at night in the hangar, close enough to kiss, his hand hovering just above her back. The headline beneath it read, "Rhodes's new pet project? Waitress turned mistress designs herself into power. Her throat tightened. This isn't true. I know. But they will. He didn't deny it. He just looked at her, and in his silence, she saw something that hurt more than anger. Shame. So that's it? She asked. You're going to stand there and say nothing? What do you want me to say? That I didn't build this for you to hide the moment someone looked too closely. Callan didn't move. I have a company to protect. And I have a name, she snapped, voice shaking, one that no one even knew until you let them twist it. This isn't about the article, Ellie. Then what is it? It's about what happens when you give the world something fragile. They break it. She stared at him, blinking fast. You mean me? I mean us. There is no us, she said, and the moment the words left her mouth, she felt them cut. His expression didn't shift, but his voice dropped low. Then maybe we were both pretending. She left the hangar without another word. The scarf he gave her remained folded in her coat pocket. The notebook of sketches stayed on her nightstand. She didn't block his number. He didn't call. Days passed. The article spread. Comments turned cruel. Her professor stopped acknowledging her in class. Her design forums deleted her profile for conflict of interest. And still, Callan said nothing publicly. No denial, no defense. Just silence. The same silence he had once claimed as sanctuary. Now it felt like betrayal. One evening, while cleaning out her desk at the student studio, she found a note she had written to herself months ago. A single sentence. Don't build anything for people who can't stay. She folded it once, then again, then let it fall into the trash. That night, she packed her things, boarded a bus out of the city, and left behind the skyline that had once felt like possibility. She didn't cry. She didn't write. She just vanished. The way ghosts do when they finally realize no one is waiting for them to be seen. And somewhere, high above the clouds in a jet she helped create, Callan sat alone, holding the manifesto she had written, and wondering why the quiet he'd once loved now felt like punishment. The airport terminal buzzed with the usual chaos of delayed flights and impersonal announcements, but Ella moved through it unnoticed, just another figure in a dark coat with a clipboard and tired eyes. After 3 months in self-exile living with her cousin in a coastal town, designing furniture sketches no one would see, she had taken a temporary job with a private flight services company. It paid little, offered no benefits, but it let her stay in motion. That morning, she was assigned to provide last-minute in-flight service for a VIP passenger on a red-eye departure. She didn't ask who. She never did. She boarded the plane 20 minutes early to prep the cabin and arrange the meal service. It wasn't until the door closed and the wheels lifted off the runway that she turned from the galley and saw him. Callan was sitting in the last row. No assistant, no entourage. Just him and a folder resting on his knee. He didn't look surprised. He didn't even flinch. He only met her eyes, steady and unreadable. "You're early," he said. She swallowed hard. "You're late." For a long moment, neither moved. Then Elle walked slowly toward him, her hand still holding the tray of glasses she had been arranging. She set it down on the table beside him, the movement quiet and mechanical. "Who requested me for this flight?" "I didn't know it would be you." "And if you had?" "I would have flown anyway." "Why?" "Because I got tired of pretending you were someone I could forget." She didn't sit. She didn't speak. She only stood there, watching him the way she used to, like she was searching for fractures in armor that no longer seemed impenetrable. "You didn't defend me," she said finally. "I know." "You let them ruin everything I built." "I know." "You disappeared, Callan, because I thought I had to protect what mattered." "You mean your company." "I mean you." His voice was low, rougher than she remembered. You think I stayed silent because I didn't care? Ella, I stayed silent because I thought the noise would drown you. It did, she said, but not the noise you feared. The silence. She turned to leave, but he stood quickly. Don't walk away this time, not without knowing the truth. You had your chance. I know, and I failed. His hands clenched at his sides. But I read every article, I tracked every comment, I wanted to fix it, and then I realized maybe I was the one who broke it to begin with. She looked at him, tears stinging at the edge of her control. Then say something you haven't said to anyone else. He was quiet for a breath, then said, I kept the first sketch you drew, the one of your hands. I have it framed in my office. I look at it every morning before I speak to anyone. Why? Because it reminds me that not everything built in silence is empty. Ella exhaled, shaky. She finally sat slowly in the seat across from him. What happens now? She asked. Now, I tell you I'm sorry, he said. Not just for leaving, for not being brave enough to say I was afraid of needing someone. You weren't the problem. You were the mirror. She blinked fast. I'm not who I was when we met. Neither am I. So, what are we now? He reached into his coat and pulled out a small folded envelope. Inside was her manifesto, creased, worn, edges soft from handling. You called it softness at 30K feet. I think you were wrong. I was? You weren't designing a cabin, he said. You were designing a way to let people feel safe while they fly, and I've never felt safe with anyone until you. The plane coasted above the clouds, quiet, steady. She reached across up the small aisle, her fingers brushing the edge of the paper he held. I don't know if we can go back, she said. Then let's not, he replied. Let's build forward. And for the first time in months, Ellie let herself breathe, not like she was holding back pain, but like she was finally letting go of it. The jet soared into darkness, but inside the cabin 2 people sat still, side by side, closer than they had ever dared before. No labels, no defenses, just the echo of everything they never stopped hoping for. 6 months later, the cabin they'd designed together officially launched under a new division of RHOAR called Haven. The press called it a luxury rebrand, but insiders knew better. It wasn't about wealth, it was about quiet, about carving out moments of softness above the clouds. Elle became creative director of the line, not through a public announcement, but by simply showing up every morning and doing the work. She designed spaces where solitude didn't mean loneliness and silence didn't feel like punishment. Callan didn't hover. He didn't claim her. But he never missed a single morning coffee meeting, never skipped a design review, and never let her walk out of the hangar without asking one question. Are we still flying the same direction? They kept their relationship private, not secret, just sacred. In a world hungry for spectacle, they chose substance. Ellie moved into a modest apartment downtown, still took the train, still ordered cheap coffee with too much cream. Callan gave up his penthouse and moved into a glass-walled loft above the design lab, saying it felt closer to something real. They spent their evenings not in restaurants or galas, but sketching side by side, sometimes speaking, sometimes not. Once, when a storm grounded all flights for 2 days, they stayed inside a prototype cabin on the test lot, sleeping in clothes, drinking tea from paper cups, talking about things they'd never dared voice before. That night, Elle whispered, I still don't know what we are. Callan replied, We're people who stopped pretending we didn't need anyone. And that was enough. When the first Haven jet took off on its maiden commercial voyage, Callan didn't attend the ribbon cutting. Elle did. She stood by the boarding stairs in a dark green coat, watching passengers file into a space she had dreamed into existence. One elderly woman paused before entering and said, "It's beautiful in there. Feels like someone finely designed for the human heart." Ella smiled, blinking fast. That was the goal. That night, Callan waited on the rooftop of their building with 2 glasses of wine and the original manifesto rolled in a leather case. "You were right," he said. "About what? People need softness more than spectacle." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "So do billionaires, apparently." He chuckled. "Especially billionaires." They didn't get married, not because they didn't believe in commitment, but because they had already made 1,000 small vows, in the way they listened, in the way they stayed, in the way they didn't demand definitions for things that were still growing. One spring morning, Elle found a wrapped box on her drafting table. Inside was the first sketch she ever drew for him, now encased in glass. Her open hands. Beneath it, Callan had written in black ink, "Now full. With everything you gave me." As they continued to build, both in the sky and on the ground, their story became one no headline could capture. It wasn't about scandal or ambition or empire. It was about finding someone who looked past your silence and chose to stay anyway. And in a world that often rewarded noise, they found freedom in stillness. Not because it was perfect, but because it was real. Elle once told a student intern who asked her how to design for comfort, "Don't start with what people want, start with what they never say out loud." She looked out the window at a jet ascending into sunrise and added, "Then build something that listens." And far above, at 30K feet, someone reclined in a chair she had drawn, beneath lights she had softened, held by the quiet she had once been afraid of. But not anymore, because now she knew. Love wasn't loud, it was steady, like wings, like wind, like the kind of silence that finally makes you feel seen. Did you know? The soundproofing systems used in modern luxury jets are often inspired by techniques from high-end music studios, proof that even in flight, true innovation begins with learning how to listen.